Hello, everyone. I see people started to log in. Welcome to Kinect Space third and final webinar for the season. Um, I am happy to be with you today. And today we're going to speak about how to obtain a letter of recommendation. And I want to spend some time with you all getting some questions, feedback of how does the webinar, how did the webinar go, and what would you like to hear from us in the future about in your journey for the match 2021. So welcome everyone. Uh, I am having today with me Satira, is one of the co-founder of Kinex Space. Hello, Satira. Thank you for being here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
And Dr. Zishan will be joining us very shortly as well to take some questions as well. With that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. Just give me a second. Please keep the questions coming in the chat and we'll be filtering them and iterating them into our presentation today. How's everyone doing on a Sunday morning in New York? Tell us where are you coming from and what are you been doing for the day? Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're gonna do the interviews very soon. Thank you, Ahmed. Okay. You guys are all doing amazing job hanging in there and being ready for your interviews, and your application should be ready in place very soon. For me, what I have been doing this weekend, I have been trying to figure out what I'm gonna do with the school opening next month. So that has been my plan for the weekend. um, does anyone in the audience have any kids or starting in September? Thank you so much for the presentation from Chicago. Where do you prefer the questions? So Krishna, you can put the questions in the Q&A section, so that'll make them easier for me to answer them. And we can keep the chat for the comments and other ads. Like, so if I wanna, let's say you wanna share the link for the next event with you all, we're gonna share it on the chat. Thank you. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and start. I'm just gonna check on the panelists if Muhammad is not here yet. I thought he got the time wrong, so I text him that we're starting at 1 p.m., not 2 p.m. So we'll see about that. But without further ado, I want to start our presentation, and then we'll start getting the questions answered while we're doing so. So for those who joining us for the first time today, I want to say a little few words about Kinex Space and what are we doing at Kinex Space. So Kinex Space is a startup for virtual support groups for physicians in early career stages for now, but we are planning to work with doctors in different stages of their career. And in Kinex Space, we hope to help medical students and residents who are going into their journey for different subspecialties to find the right mentorship and coaching through that process, and also have access to different mental health resources and well-being during that journey. So my name again is Ala El Najjar, and I am the founder of Connect Space, and I am also a child adolescent psychiatry fellow at Montefiore Medical Center. I happen also to be the vice president for the largest union for physicians in training in the US, which is called CAR, short for Committee of Interns and Residents. So I'm happy to be with you today. And this is our guest speaker, Dr. Muhammad Zishan, who will join us very shortly. Muhammad and I both a child psychiatrist. He is a few steps ahead of me in the career. He's right now attending at Rutgers Hospital, and he's actually also an amazing person to connect with and to know. I have been friends with Muhammad for almost 4 years now, and we've been working together on improving access of care to all physicians who are seeking to work in the United States as a physician. So when Muhammad come in, I will introduce more about his background. And if anyone wants to contact us after the presentation, we're going to leave our emails in the chat, and we're also going to leave the contacts for Connect Space at the end of that presentation. Well, with that being said, I want to start the presentation of today by, again, celebrating all of you and take that moment and say, how are you doing? And how is the process of the applying for the residency going? And I can start seeing the comments and see from you guys, tell me how is the application going, and if anyone wanted to say anything about their application, I'm gonna read those comments out loud for a minute. While you are putting them in there, I wanna tell you that I am so proud of all of you taking this path, and I know that this year is harder than before because of a lot of uncertainty about the interviews and the whole season and the changes in the application process. So you've been doing the best of your ability to catch up with all this, and that could be really hard. And we wanted to tell you that you're not in it alone, and we're here to help you with that process. And although there is a lot of uncertainty, but there's also possibility of doing it together and taking it step by step, which will make the journey so much easier. Okay, so I see there is one question in the chat here, two questions actually. Let me see if I can pull up the questions. For some reason, I can't see the questions if I am viewing my screen. So what I will ask Satira and Leila to help me with this would be just kind of like if you can text me on the Slack channel the questions, and I will start reading them while we're talking.
Sure.
Thank you. So I will start by disclosure before we dive into the details of what we're going to answer today from your questions. Those informations and ideas that we're going to talk about today is based on my own personal experience as a resident and being an advocate for residents for the last 4 years of my life. And this presentation is not sponsored by any of the affiliated institution that I work with or worked with in the past. And also I wanted you to keep in mind that any information that we're going to share today might change even an hour later because of all the changes that happen related to COVID. So we still, unfortunately, in the United States have the pandemic of COVID-19, and based on that, a lot of regulations being changing while we're doing so. And so I have a question saying, the starting MPH help with the match in the internal medicine? And can you clarify the abbreviation of MPH, because I'm not familiar with that abbreviation? Thank you so much. I'll do that. So while that question being clarified, I want to ask you to type in the chat or the questions. What's your expectation for today? What would you like to learn about the letter of recommendations? Also, the question of like, have you got your letter of recommendations already or not? So let's see. Someone posted something in the chat. Oh, MOH, Master of Public Health. Okay. So I think that question, master in public health. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. So I haven't got that master's before. I know people who actually got it. It depends on what are you applying for. So that question can public health is important for a different specialty. Internal medicine, of course, is one of the things that that you would benefit from having master in public health. The question is like, how does that gonna help you in your overall presentation? So let's say you are doing this master of public health for hope in the future once you finish your residency to become a leader in an administrative process in public health. And that's make a lot of sense if the rest of your resume is related to that. And that depend on the timing with the other things that you do with your work as an applicant. So let's say that master of public health will take away some years between you and applying for the residency. Did you have the rest of your steps ready? And the master of public health will make your presentation much better. So it will add a value if you will go to that subspecialty or route after you apply for your residency. I don't think there is a right answer for that, but it's depend on your own timeline of like, if let's say you didn't take any of your steps and you're gonna spend that time while you're taking that master to take the steps and build your application. That makes sense if that's something you want to do while you're taking your test, and that does not consider the gap in your career. And if that answer your question, just type in the chat it is, or if you need any follow-up on that question afterward, please wait till the end of the webinar and I will share our contact information for further questioning. And you probably receive that in your email for the webinar as well. So that's a really good question, and it could be a solution for the gap for some people who are wants to take their tests but don't want to have a gap in their career and in their application. There is another question saying, oh, hi, Zishan, how are you? Hi, Muhammad. Dr. Zishan just joined us, and I just started with taking the questions, Dr. Zishan, about the letter of recommendations and other questions. And the first question was, would having a master in public health before applying to internal medicine make a difference? And my answer was basically that it depends on the person timeline and why they taking this masters. And I said that part of the value would be that if they are taking their tests or steps while they're taking the master and they don't want to have a gap in their between the graduation and applying, it could be a plus. But if you have anything that you would like to add about that, or know someone who took master of public health that you want to relate to that question, we can do that as well.
I think the key here is not only what you do, but also how you phrase it when you're writing in your personal statement. For example, in any specialty, every training director values someone who is in scholarly work, in research, who knows the public health perspective. So instead of you mentioning that I just have done this MPH to cover my time, or I have just done because I have time, you be more proactive, that you always, along with your clinical work, you always enjoy understanding any clinical scenario more on the public health perspective. You wanted to learn about the depending on what's your main area of focus in public health, but you can mention you wanted to learn because you always value understanding cultural, racial, social determinant of health. And that's why you did MPH, and that makes, and hopefully that will help you during your residency, to see things in a broader perspective. So it's not only simply stating, you have done MPH and this is your course and here you have done it, but how being more proactive, being rather than. And the other thing is that sometimes people also mention, I have done MPH and that made me feel, or that made me learn this. So I always like someone who takes even more proactive, that I did MPH to learn this things, and that's how it will help me to be a better resident. Thank you, Ella.
Awesome. That's a really great answer, Zishan. I think I second Muhammad on his in his comment. And as I said, everything gets, when it comes in a context, it makes a huge difference. Another question that came on the chat about their expectation for today is that Raquel is saying that my expectation is to understand the most important aspects of letter of recommendations and how to request letter of recommendation for internal medicine or family medicine. So that's an easy question, and the structure that I have for today is just for me to share some experience of how did I ask for the letter of recommendation, and for Muhammad to say the same, and then we'll take more questions about that. So I did ask for letter of recommendations in two situations. First one was for residency, and the second was for the child fellowship application. And I think my experience in applying for the fellowship got better by understanding some of the pitfalls that I did have during getting those letter of recommendations for the residency. So the first question is, who do you ask for the letter of recommendations? So that's the first question to when you start preparing yourself to do that process. So who do you ask? I would say it depends on what are you applying for and where. So you can get as many as letter of recommendations as you want and put them in your ERAS application. But when you're assigning those letters, that's where you can be mindful of where to get them. But basically what you need is that you are applying for training. So no matter where is your training is, like you're gonna do internal medicine, psychiatry, so you want someone from your academic institution just prior to applying to the state to have that letter in there. So that could be an attending who you shadowed either in your own in your home country or the US. It could be a program director of a residency who you just did before you're applying for this residency in the US. It also could be a mentor that you are shadowing either with the COVID right now, telepsychiatry or telemedicine rotations, or it could be a mentor that you worked with in a research perspective. I always look at the letter of recommendation the same way they are dividing them in the ERAS. So they divide the ERAS into three places, right? Your work experience, your research experience, and your volunteer experience. And if you look at those three areas, if you can get a letter of recommendation related to each one of those, that would be great. And one of them being in the US experience, that is will be the ultimate one. So if you are an international graduate and one of those letters are coming from a US attending or a physician or a nurse practitioner, or anyone that you worked with in the United States, it just gives the message that you got exposed to the US system. And this is where we kind of like understand why the US clinical experience is important for the international medical graduate. I got a lot of questions offline before this presentation about, like, we had a lot of rotation got canceled with the COVID, so can we get a letter of recommendation from a tele rotation? Absolutely, yes. All of the program directors are understanding that a lot of the externship and the observership got canceled because of the COVID-19, and it does speaks about your flexibility and ability to adjust to the situation, and you're able to get a tele rotation in. And if you get an acceptance to a rotation and you haven't got into the rotation and you got a Zoom or any remote interaction with that person, and he or she or they willing to write you a letter of recommendation, I think that also could add a value if you had some contact between that period. And I would leave that as a last line of action, because it's better if that letter of recommendation comes from someone that you actually worked with and know you very well. But if it's come to that last one, that your US clinical experience is got canceled or delayed, but you still have some contact with that person remotely via the internet, I think that still is a good place to have that letter as a backup as well. And I want to hand it to Muhammad to say his experience about talking about who to ask for the letter of recommendation, and then I'll take it back when we're talking about when and how.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very important question, who to ask. I would say, and especially my background in psychiatry, but I think it's always good to have people who are in your specialty, but people who are applying in internal medicine, it's good that they can have from different specialty too. So what I think that if you have worked with many people, but one person, that you, during your work with that person was very encouraging or had good interaction or something that was very memorable, and so it's good to ask that person in particular, because letter recommendation not only who is writing it, but also it need to be good, more personal. And so it's good to just think which person might be a good, who can elaborate about your work, who knows you in person, and who can comment on your not only clinical but also your you as a person. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you so much, Muhammad. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I also saw in the chat someone asking something related to that, said like, I did residency in my home country and I'm doing now a PhD in the US. Is it helpful to get a letter of recommendation from the previous residency? I said absolutely yes. And I would say, I would argue that this is one of the fundamental letters to get. In my experience, I did residency in psychiatry and neurology before doing psychiatry here, and that was one of the essential letters. I got a letter from my mentor, who I did my master degree with during my residency, and it really was a helpful letter to have. Yeah, I'm sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, so I'm reading the second question, which is saying, hi, I'm a repeat applicant and I have 2 recent letter of recommendation. One letter of recommendation from my previous US clinical experience in 2017, and because of the pandemic, I couldn't get another recent letter of recommendation. I have no contact with my 2017 letter of recommendation author now. So will that affect my application? Muhammad, do you want to take the lead in that, and then I can piggyback on your answer?
Sure. So what I'm understanding is that this person has worked with someone, has a letter recommendation, but no, didn't have contact with that person.
Yeah, and they applied with that letter of recommendation before, and it seems like would that affect the application if they used that letter of recommendation, the same one from 2017?
I think it depending on how good that letter recommendation was, and and sometime the people say, oh, the letter recommendation was waived, but at least you get a sense about the person who wrote that letter recommendation, either what he wrote. You got some sense based on your work. So I would say, if that is a really you believe, depending on it's waived or unwaived, if you believe that was an excellent letter recommendation, and that person elaborate all the key areas, and you don't have, and as you mentioned that because of the COVID you may not have other letter recommendation or as good as that letter recommendation, and especially if that letter recommendation is specifically for your specialty, I would think it's not a bad idea to have that letter recommendation, especially if you don't have that kind of quality letter recommendation in the past few months or a year. So thank you, Ella.
Thank you so much for your answer, Vishen. I agree with that, and I also see that someone asking in the chat about if the clinical based letter of recommendation coming from a physician with a teaching hospital affiliated is a strong letter. And I guess my answer on that is that yes, absolutely. And I would say the academic institutions letters have a value. I wouldn't say it's a more valuable than the community hospitals. I always find the letter of recommendations helpful based on who is writing that letter of recommendation and how they are describing the applicant, and that would matter the most. So you can get a letter of recommendation of one liner from the most prestigious hospital in the world, and then you get a more clear, detailed letter of recommendation from someone who worked with you closely for 3 years. I would say that the value of that letter of recommendation that works with you for those 3 years, that have details, well written letter is more than one liner from someone who worked with you for a little time or know you not very much. So that's my answer for that question. I don't know how, Muhammad, do you have a different answer for that question about the teaching hospital?
Yeah, I think just one practical thing that we have seen, people who are in academic institution, they are much familiar with the how to write. They may are in a better how to write a letter recommendation more geared towards residency application. But I agree with Ella that if that is just a few line letter recommendation, I think it's better to have a letter recommendation from a community physician who can write a good and more personal letter recommendation. The only thing what I would suggest is that you may have to be more you may have to help sometime the physician who are in community to how to write, what to highlight. So maybe you may have to do a little bit more work, but it depending on how strong how detailed the letter recommendation, and if the community person can write that more personal, I would prefer the community physician over the academic one. Thank you, Ella.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue to our next point in the presentation of like how to ask for a letter of recommendation, right? And I think there is different way to do that. And my take-home message for you about that is that every attending or supervisor, or I will call it in this presentation, every writer for a letter of recommendation will have a different style. What you need to know is that there is a structure and a well-known format of what is the program directors are expecting from those letter of recommendation that you may need to guide and help that person, that writer, before you ask for that letter of recommendation. I think IRAS did a great job by putting those guidelines into the format when you ask someone to upload your letter of recommendation. And Muhammad can speak a little bit about that, given the fact that he is right now in a position where like mostly will start writing letter of recommendation to people. But look, you read those guidelines yourself, and I would say in my experience, what I did from the person who wrote my letter of recommendation from the US experience is that I actually sat down with that person at that time. I had a conversation about my personal statement and my CV after I sent them. So first step was that I asked the permission, and I asked that in person because that was around the end of my clinical experience rotation. If you already have finished your rotation or the thing that you're already asking the letter from, so that can happen through email or phone. And then when you send your information that is really well written and done, like your personal statement that you are submitting it for the ERAS and your CV that you are submitting it to the ERAS, once you have those two things, you can start asking for the letter of recommendation. And I highly recommend that you do those two steps before asking for the letter of recommendation. And I know sometimes people don't finish their personal statement and CV till last minute, and then so they need to ask for letter of recommendation before that. But that's where I will say when to ask for the letter of recommendation and how. So the how part is like I say, have a meeting with that person, either a Zoom, a phone call, if it's possible. And if that person is super busy and they can't have that meeting with you, then have this outline of how it would look like in your emails and have the conversation going before you ask for the letter of recommendation, and have the CV and the personal statement ready before you ask for that. So that's for the how, and I merged the when with it because I think it's important to come with the how with the when, as after you write your personal statement and after you finished like around the end of finishing an experience with someone, is that when you ask about the letter of recommendation. Mohammed, do you have any important guidance point for regarding the when and how?
I think, yeah, you explained all those points really well. Yeah.
So, and I think maybe we, at this point, we can take a second question. So I do have someone who's asking about, Krishna asking about, this is the third year applicant, third year Caribbean medical student working with one of the internal medicine preceptor. He is busy hospitals. Do you prefer me to buy the ERAS token for this match year and get it uploaded so I can use that for the next match year? So the answer to that is no. Every year application has a different token. So by buying it for this year, you're gonna lose the money. This token is just for this year. And then, so I can use that for the next match year. So I'm assuming that the reason of why you wanna do that, you wanna upload the letter now before you lose it. So what I would say is that you ask for the letter of recommendation right now for this year and keep that letter of recommendation with you. And then when you apply for next year, kind of like send the same letter for the person saying like, I'm applying this year and I would like you to upload that letter at that time. But Muhammad, if you have a different approach to do that, you can say it at this point.
Sometime you lost the contact, and then I agree that you need to buy a new token and then request again at that time.
Yeah, and the only benefit that you will gain from buying the token right now, I see your point also, that you want to upload the letter now and then keep it so it can be automatically re-uploaded, but then you will have an old date for the letter of recommendation, and that's value of having a letter of recommendation with a new date may be beneficial. So I think it's gonna come down to your judgment of how, like if you feel like you're gonna lose that letter of recommendation if it's not uploaded now, you can do so, but you can't just buy the token and upload the letter of recommendation because you need to do all the rest of the applications as well. That's my understanding. And that's also I'm not sure, but I have to get back to you. I need to check if that will make you a repeat applicant or not. If you buy the token this year and you didn't match, does that mean that you are applying for the match for second year? Because that's how the people know that you're applying for the match second time. So you don't want to be applying for the match twice. I will get back to you via email at that point if you send me an email after that webinar. about that, Krishna. Okay, so yeah, that's a really great question. How about we take a few minutes and ask Muhammad about his experience with the letter of recommendation. How did you ask for letter of recommendations, Muhammad, and how did you get them?
I think the how piece I would say is it's always uh, once you have been working, it's always good to get some feedback during your rotation. So at least you are getting some sense who to ask that we already discussed. And then also notice, some points, like at some point that mentor, that supervisor gave you some feedback and then you worked on it. And then, he or she gave you some comments.
Muhammad, you got muted for a second, so
Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah.
no problem.
Thank you, Ella. So
problem.
have all those, the interaction that you have with your supervisor may be written before you ask, and then when you are writing an email, or when you are trying to meet that person to request a letter of recommendation, just say good things, that you have been working with that person and you really enjoyed, and mention maybe one or two specific things, that person commented on you, or you saw some challenging case, and then share that you felt really good about the feedback, and you learned a lot, and you want, and it will be great that if they can write a letter of recommendation. And sometime, if that person is really busy, so I think it's good to comment in your email or in your request when you talk, that that they have a really busy schedule, and you really appreciate, and anything that can help them to write this letter of recommendation, you will be more than happy to provide, either with your personal statement, with your resume, or anything. So have that open, so that person doesn't, because a lot of time, if a supervisor work with you really well, that person want to write a letter of recommendation, but maybe that person has a very busy schedule. So having those options open, so that if that person want to write but a busy schedule, at least you have that open conversation, that anything that you can help with that person will be great. Yes, Ella.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think this is one of the take-home messages that I would recommend, actually. Before the end of your rotation, and when you send a thank you letter for that person, for shadowing them or working with them, and you know that you're going to ask them for a letter of recommendation later, I would point the learning points that you learned, and what did you gain in a very nice language and writing, so then they can get back to those points and then draft their letter of recommendation out of that. And as Muhammad said, like a lot of attendings in the United States and outside of the United States love the shadowing and the working and the teaching part, but when it comes to drafting the letter, may be difficult to do so because of the time constraints. So what you're doing by highlighting what you learned from that rotations, your strength, and what you gained will make that process so much easier when you get the letter of recommendation. We can, I had a similar question to that one. Someone asking about if I didn't get a letter of recommendation from a US a member right now, from a US rotation, since they were canceled, can they get just the home country letter of recommendations? What's your sense, Muhammad, on that right now for this year application?
So what I understood is that this person worked with some physician in US, but didn't get a letter of recommendation.
No, they
sorry.
did it. They got canceled their US application. So right now they're just gonna get from their home country letter of recommendation.
I see. Thank you, Ella, for correction. Yeah, I think first of all, you may not be alone in this scenario. Maybe there are a lot of other applicants who had the same struggle, and I think people understand that, the training director understand. Even you can see that this year, even the date, the match is delayed, even the interview process. So people have, this is a very different situation. So first of all, you're not alone in it. The second thing is that, as I said, that it's good to have a letter of recommendation from your local institution. One thing that I think I mentioned earlier is the people, like if you work in US, so physician here, they are more maybe well versed, so they know like what things to highlight and what language to use during the letter recommendation. I think in your home institution, you may have to, again, the same thing, you may have to be more specific what things they need to highlight, what areas they need to focus. And I think I believe we will focus more on, I think in the next, like what to write. But I think it's good to have a good letter of recommendation either from US, but if that's not the case, then from your home institution. Thank you, Ella.
Yeah, I would second that as well. And I think, while I'm not a program director and I don't know how program directors will choose their applicant based on, I think there was a lot of understanding from all the programs that have been taking a lot of international medical graduates. They understand that there was a lot of interruption due to COVID, and not having a letter of recommendation from a US doctor, there may be some loosening guidelines around that, so we can know for sure what's going to happen. It's never has been like a known rule that you need to have it from a US clinical experience. I think it adds a lot of value, but not having it's not, from my point of understanding, is not a reason to exclude your application. I would say that is the same situation for the American graduate, because they lost some of the rotations and the electives because of the COVID, and those electives were important for their letter of recommendation. So it's the understanding it's gonna be for all the program directors, either IMGs or AMG. And there was a question related to that in the chat about, if I can get a letter of recommendation from my dean, would that be helpful? My answer is yes, absolutely. That would be a helpful letter. Muhammad, you can also comment on that if you want.
No, I agree. I think I hope we highlight this point later too, that it's not, again, I think we mentioned this a couple of times, and that it's not only who you are asking or where that person is, either from a teaching hospital, community hospital in US or in your own country, is what they write and how they write it. So and especially if letters coming from dean that even has I would say worth because when they see the designation of the dean of the institution, that may add a little bit more value.
Absolutely. And that also takes us to the next point of the presentation today, is that if you are like getting the letter of recommendation, there's two ways to get the letter of recommendation uploaded to your ERAS. So there is something called waived and unwaived. So the writer can, you can waive your right to see the letter. So that has a stronger effect, that you may not be seeing the letter when it's uploaded. The downside of it, if you are not sure of the person that you're asking the letter, how the letter will look like, and this letter, you're absolutely using it as a essential letter, that you will be not knowing what the writer wrote in this letter. So I would say waive your right based on your judgment of what is the benefits from waiving my right. So I waived my right, I believe, in during the child fellowship application from the program director point of view. And I think I had, if I remember correctly, all my letters in the fellowship were waived. I remember in the residency, I have one unwaived letter, because I actually kind of like had a conversation back and forth, and the writer asked me to look at the letter before he uploaded it, so I didn't waive my right because I actually saw the letter. So I don't know, Muhammad, if you have any comments on this point. You're muted, but I think you said like
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Yeah. So how many letters do you need? That's a question always come up. I think every year the standard so far that you need a minimum of 3 letters. Is that correct, Muhammad? Still the case? It's the You're muted also still.
as 2, but it's good to have 3.
Yeah, okay. So the minimum is 2 now.
I believe in some
Yeah.
specialty I have heard.
Yeah, and that's important to know though, too. I am not familiar with the other specialties for psychiatry. I believe they are 2, and 3rd is important if you want to apply for different programs. One of the questions that came up also in the chat is someone saying that I just finished microbiology PhD from Howard University. I plan to apply for IM. Is it okay to ask my professor for a letter of recommendation? None of them a medical director, but they are microbiologists. What do you think about that question, Mohammed?
But I understood that the person that she worked is the microbiologist.
Yeah, did the rotation in microbiology and applying for internal medicine.
I see. So it depends on either you have a letter recommendation from internal medicine or not. That's one thing. And how good have you worked with this person during that rotation in microbiology? Because Alab, I missed the initial. Did we discuss, what we have to write in the letter recommendation? Or I can highlight a little bit here. Like,
no, you can highlight it here. We didn't
okay.
start that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it all depends how that person will write a letter recommendation, because what we have noticed is, and what I said we mean, like, as a faculty, when we are reviewing the letter recommendation, many program I know they have some criteria that sometimes we see a letter recommendation that is just highlighting the clinical aspect. So it's good to have the first paragraph where they mention how long you have worked with that person and what kind of setting it was that you work. And the second, highlighting not only your clinical work that you have done, but also knowing you as a person. So maybe, in the clinical, that person can highlight about, little bit about your microbiology background. But if you work with that person a longer time, or if that person know you a little bit more at a personal level, that person also highlight your other strength. And the other thing is that a lot of time applicants, they mention their so suppose that they have done 3 or 4 months of rotation in microbiology with that person, but in the past they have a lot of experience in teaching, they have a lot of experience in leadership role, they have done something even during their high school, something that was leadership, teaching, or some clinical. So I think having that said by the person who is writing a letter recommendation also strengthen your like highlighting those things in to the program director, because sometimes the training director may quickly look over the resume and may have missed those important things that you have done during high school. So having that person along with the clinical also highlighting those stuff, those characteristic in your letter recommendation. And yeah, so and then at the end your clinical, your some leadership, teaching, scholarly activities, and how strongly that person feel that you are suitable for the internal medicine. So having that phrases at the end will help that letter recommendation to be suitable to internal medicine. So it depends. If you have any other good letter recommendation for internal medicine, then it may be good to use those. But if not, then I think asking the person to structure in a way that also highlighting other areas that may make you a better candidate in terms of your application. Yes, Ella.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that totally. And I also would say, like, again, if you're applying for internal medicine and someone who you are worked with is in a hospital that you're applying to, that will considered as your 3rd letter. So that make more sense than the microbiology PhD. If that microbiology PhD rotation is related to infectious disease fellowship that you want to do afterward, or any kind of fellowship that you're going to do afterward, you can try to ask the writer to provide that in the letter. So how is internal medicine going to help you to do that? Back to what Ahmed said before in the personal statement presentation, you also want to be mindful of, like, if you do so, then you might put yourself in a trap where, like, you are like putting it like a little bit of like narrowing your area of interest. So the reader of that, put yourself on the shoes of the reader and say, like, okay, if that person wants to go to infectious disease fellowship and I don't have it, maybe that's too specific for me. Maybe I want someone who's open for anything. I would have to say that in the letter of recommendation, though, being a specific is not a bad thing as the personal statement. So you can be wider in your range in your personal statement, but what's will make more sense is that you align both of them together. So what I would recommend is that after you get your letter of recommendation, and if you didn't waive your right to see that letter, or you know what you're going to write in, if you want to make sure that if you're going to adjust anything in your personal statement based on those letter of recommendation, that will also make the reader feel like that all makes sense. So the value of the letter of recommendation with the personal statement, with the CV, for the program directors when they are screening the applicant, that they will offer them interviews, that this applicant sounds on paper like a good fit and we are interested in having them. And the more homogeneous those three elements are together, the more chances you have to get an offer from that program. I don't know if Muhammad found that similar experience or not, but that was kind of my experience both in residency and fellowship.
Experience, and I think those are very genuine and strong points that you mentioned, Ella.
Yeah, those are great points. We have more questions here. I also want to go back to the when a little bit. So I want you to be mindful of your time of asking the letter of recommendation, because sometimes the writer, if they're busy, they don't have time to get that letter of recommendation ready by the time you submit your application. So I would say the earlier the better. Once you finish your rotation and you are in the season, you already bought your token, and there's I even say, like, you can start asking for the letter before you buy your token, because sometimes it takes time to draft it, and then once you get the approval and they start drafting it and the token is out to be bought, but it's the token usually comes 3 months before the submission open. So I would say that's a good time frame to start asking for the letter of recommendation. You're giving yourself sometimes, if you want to have the letter of recommendations ready by the time you apply. That being said, I don't see as a negative if you have some delayed rotations because of the COVID, and then you were able to secure a medicine rotation after you bought your token, and that rotation will consider it as a US experience or part of something important related to your application. That would mean that you will submit the letter of recommendation a little bit later than you submit your application. That will still be valuable. I would recommend in this point that you have another like 2 letters ready and leave that spot, the third spot, for the important letter that you need to put it to assign it. And after you assign it to the programs that you're applying for, I would email the program coordinator and say, hey, I got my final letter of recommendation and I uploaded it. I hope you still can consider looking at it. And that's my 2 cents on the when piece. Muhammad, if you want to chip in here about the when piece.
Points.
Okay, so I'm going to keep looking at the questions, and please keep those questions coming, but we are also coming closer to an end. So I want to take also some time to talk about future events, but let me see if I have more questions here in the chat. I see, how long can it be consider a long gap from graduation to applying? It's a tricky question. What do you think, Muhammad, about that? What's the long gap?
You say what's a long gap?
Yeah, what considered a long gap from graduation to applying?
I think
I remember it was 5 years, right?
Yes, yeah, I think it's 3 to 5 years, I would say, depending on the specialty too.
Yeah, that's right. It's getting shorter every year, but the latest I know it was like 3 to 5. Yeah. Can you explain what things should include in the letter coming from my home country? Thank you. I would say, in my opinion, the letter that I got from so the letter that you get from your program director if you did residency per se in your home country. So you need to have in that your work experience, your research experience if it happened during residency, and your volunteer experience, right? Let's say you were the chief resident. That's a great volunteer versus work experience because you actually worked as a chief. Research experience, let's say you were able to write something or present something with that writer during that period in your home country. This also goes into the letter of recommendations. So interactions, I go back to I just said, the ERAS application, and you want things to look similar when it's come to your CV, your personal statement, and your letter of recommendation, but not the same. You don't want them to be the same, but they want the thing that you highlighted in your CV so that the person who are speaking about them are giving their own perspective on that story. So let's say you wrote in your CV that you did a presentation in one of the biggest conferences, APA, with that person. So you're writing that as just as the name of the presentation. The writer will be writing their own experience of presenting with you at that conference. Does that make sense? So they are writing your strength, but from their point of view, and that's if it's a theme and it's coming out. That's why I said, when you, after you finish your rotation and you are expecting to ask a person for a letter of recommendation, it's important to highlight what you learned from that person related to your strength, and how did you make that strength out of that rotation. Does that make sense? And Muhammad, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I feel, letter recommendation from the local institutions, there may be some good strengths in it. In a way, the person who's writing the letter recommendation in your local institution, they may comment on more things. For example, they may comment during your early, if you have done anything that is that you have done during your high school, or even before, or even during medical school, because person who is writing from your local institution, he or she may knows more about the value of work that you have done. So they may highlight, along with your clinical work, they can highlight all those aspects too. And I agree, Ella, that it's what you have mentioned, that it's good to highlight all the important points in your letter recommendation. But I see in that perspective, the person who is from your local institution, they may highlight again, I think the point that I wanted to say, that so you may, the applicant may think, oh, I'm putting this in my resume, or I'm putting this in my personal statement. So how to how a writer can explain, and I think you mentioned in a good way that person will highlight those in a more broader perspective, like how those qualities, or how those work or teaching, or all those experience can make you a better candidate. And I think it's good to have an other person who is kind of more experienced, commenting on those qualities or those work that you have done, or you have mentioned in your resume or personal statement. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, this is a letter of recommendation is something that doesn't end by your training. So we change it into a reference letter once you finish also your training. And some people know that how busy are program directors, so they just give them a call and talk about your own experience. So, and let's keep that in your mind as long as you go with your career development, that your training will always be a reference point, either training in residency, fellowship, and that's will come back up in different career stages. There was a question about, I'm segue here to an important question. Someone asked about getting, applying for internal medicine or family medicine with a letter of recommendation from a psychiatrist and 2 from internal medicine. What do you think about that? I will be biased, but in a good way. Let's say that the mental health is a big thing that in your career in internal medicine that you care about. So that letter from psychiatrist is really valuable. And to be honest, just again, I'm biased, but I'm biased based on data and statistics. The mental health crisis that related to COVID, even before COVID, 1 in every 4 adult persons will have a symptom of mental health and need to see a professional for it. So with that 1 in 4 ratio, that means that mental health and psychiatry is important to learn about in every specialty. So I'm a child psychiatrist. Pediatricians learn about the child psychiatry in their rotations, and we are advocating for more and more learning in there. Family medicine, internal medicine, of course, they learn about the adult and geriatric psychiatry, and because it's like the psychiatry is a branch where like the overlap between the brain and mind, and the more you learn about the mental health and have a letter from a psychiatrist, I would say it has a value if you are applying for internal medicine, if you're applying for pediatrics, if you're applying for family medicine, all those major specialties. I would say also it's valuable even if you're applying for surgery, but that's just me biased again. Muhammad, what do you think about that? You're still muted, Muhammad. He probably stepped away for something.
Yes, Ella, yes.
Yeah, oh, here you go. Go ahead. I was saying getting a letter of recommendation from a specialty different than yours. I was just praising a psychiatrist letter of recommendation.
Yeah, no, I think I think one thing we are highlighting again and again, Ella, is not who is writing it, but also how they're writing it. And again, if someone is doing a letter recommendation from a different specialty, so they can highlight the clinical work, but they can also highlight the other qualities too. And add in the last paragraph, they can mention why they think that all those qualities make you a better candidate for that specialty. So even though that person is from a different specialty, and if you don't have the good letter recommendation from the same specialty, so having a good letter recommendation highlighting not only your clinical but other stuff, and how in that person who's writing a letter recommendation, how all those things together make you a better applicant for that specialty. So it's not only yes, Ella.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that. And that takes us into the next question from also one of the applicant. Ahmed is asking a very important question. What if the writer, he working with a research fellow, as a research fellow with a primary investigator, and the primary investigator wrote a generic letter? What you can do about that? Do you ignore that, or like how to advocate for a better letter if you got a generic letter?
You want me to answer it, Ella?
Yeah, you can go ahead and say that.
I see. I think sometime what happened is why the generic letter is coming. Either the letter being asked at a little bit later point, or when that person may be busy. So what I would suggest is, the more you get in touch, so for example, so you are working with that person, just keep reminding in different ways that you have done this kind of other work, and you really enjoyed working with person, and also highlight what you have learned during that experience, and then request that letter recommendation. But if that person already wrote a generic, is already there, I think just just in a nice way, just maybe write or talk that you really enjoyed working with them, and these are the things that you have learned, and you really appreciate, and you really want to apply for a psychiatry residency, and you have heard from your mentors that if highlighting and mentioning some specific qualities make you a better applicant. And you will really appreciate if you can comment on things that they have mentioned it to you in the past. So I think in that phrase, maybe
Yeah.
to request.
I
Yeah.
absolutely second that. So the point is like, can you ask for modifying the letter of recommendation? I always should say, what are you gonna lose if you ask? Like, you can ask and they say no, but you asked, but you can ask, but there is 50% chance they will say yes. So the way you ask it may help you, that you're not criticizing the letter and saying that it's generic, that's a bullshit. I'm sorry, my language is should be but it's, if you don't like the letter of recommendation and you have specific recommendation for improving that, that you can ask for that. You can ask for that in a very polite way and specific way. That's the point that Muhammad make, and I will stress on it. Strength and things specific to that rotation, and you can put them on the email. And I would say, if you are still seeing that person in person, do it on a one-on-one conversation or on a phone rather than just the email, because always the communication skills is a key, that you know how you building this relationship for the future. So if you can say, can I have a phone conversation with you about this letter? If they're busy, they're probably going to say no. But if you're seeing them even on a day-to-day basis, so just grab a chance where you are and having lunch or anything, and just take that time to talk about that, if you're still working with that person. If not, then the email will be just fine. But if you didn't ask, it's not going to happen. Yeah.
Yes. Ella, just remind me a mnemonic called STAB, STAB.
Oh, what
So-
is that for? I don't know that.
So that mnemonic is S is for situation. So it's basically how you negotiate during this kind of tough time. So S is for situation. You need to have, as you mentioned, it need to be one-to-one. So it need to be, the situation need to be one-to-one rather than just mentioning as a random. Then T is for timing. Timing is that, when you find that person in a bit lighter mood or not in a busy schedule. A is, I think, I don't know what, but it is basically you praise that person. I don't know what the, but you praise that, you appreciate that person, what that person have done for you and what you have learned. And then you mention basically specific behavior that you have that person to write. So that's,
Oh, that's really close to the Dear Man DBT skills group. Okay, great. I like that one. Yeah, we kind of using some of our psychiatry skills into asking how to ask for something and not to get someone to say
Yes.
no to you. So
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yes.
one of the skills to throw there. That
And it's
you
tab.
kind of
So,
like,
yeah.
you have to come with positive things and praise them and before you ask for the request. And you know what? You have something that you need, so you're gonna go the extra mile for it. There is a question about like someone applying for psychiatry and wants to ask how many letters specific to psychiatry should be there while applying for psych. I would say the more the merrier from psychiatrist. Again, we talked about that, and I'll press on it. The same specialty is the best. If you don't have, then get other specialties. So if you're applying for psychiatry, you have for people related to psychiatry, work, research, volunteer, and if not, then go to the next closest specialty to that. So like with internal medicine, you did internal medicine and you fell in love with psychiatry from there. That definitely makes sense to get a letter of recommendation from someone who you saw a patient on the internal medicine floor that have a psychiatric conditions, and this is how you are now applying for psychiatry, right? It all goes down to how do you make sense of the letter of recommendation, and who's writing the letter of recommendation for you, and why, when, how, and why. Again, those are the keys for today's presentation. But for your question, yes, the more the merrier. Muhammad, do you have any comments on that point?
In psychiatry, you need to remember the person who is reading a letter recommendation is also a psychiatrist. And you don't want psychiatrists to question, okay, why this person has a letter recommendation from another specialty. So it's always good. I mean, if you have, I think if you have really good 2-letter recommendation in psychiatry and one is just average, so I would say I would rather have 3 psychiatry letter recommendation, 2 are really good, 1 is average, and rather than have 2 psychiatry and 1 other specialty. Especially I'm talking about psychiatry. I heard same thing about some other subspecialty. I heard about pathology. I think maybe internal medicine, family medicine, lot of different letter recommendation can be useful, but in psychiatry, I can tell the better you can have specific to psychiatry, the better it will be.
Yeah, so yeah, with that being said, I second that too, and that goes for every other specialties. Again, you can be a pediatrician, work with a pediatrician, and then you're applying for psychiatry. You can segue by saying, "Oh, I like child psychiatry." Well, and then that made me feel like, okay, I'm gonna check out psychiatry first, and if I like it more, I'll go into child psychiatry. The thing is, like, that we need more people at this point at psychiatry. So if you are thinking of applying for psychiatry, welcome to the club. And I'm sorry for other specialties if we are trying to steal the applicants from you, but we're having a mental health crisis and we're trying to recruit as much people as we can. With that being said, I think those are the things that we want to cover for today. I think those are the questions that we have. I am gonna start talking about what are we gonna do next and what are the groups that we have. So by this webinar, we finished the webinars where it's more a general large groups presentations, and we're gonna move forward to the next level of the specific skills group. And those skills groups gonna be the webinar with the CIR. We have it. I will share it with you guys as a recording, unfortunately, but I put it in here because it was really good webinar talking to the residents about the mental well-being. But those 3 things are the things that are coming up. First one is interviewing skills group. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a group up to 10 people. So we were gonna throw a link on the chat if you're interested in signing up for that. So we're gonna take the first 10 people who sign up for that after interviewing with them, who will join us for a 6 weeks course where we're gonna have one-on-one with a group of 10 interviewing skills group, where we teach you like how is it done virtually, ask specific questions for your program. What do you do once you get a letter of offer invitation to the program? Yay. What do you do from this point till you go to the day of the interview, and what you do after the day of the interview, because that's also very important and some people forget about this part. So I have been working with a very great people who are expert in interviewing skills, and some of the value of that group that we're having someone who's not a physician will have some mock interviews with them. So where English is the first language, and also will help you with reflecting on what you're doing, and we will try to record those for you and send them to you to look at those videos while you're doing this mock with some feedback from us. And I'm sure all of you will do awesome, and I'm looking forward for people to sign up for those groups. So look out for those links for this interviewing skills. So it's gonna be in October after I take my board exam, because I'm right now studying and this is our last day of webinars. So I'm really hoping that I'll be able to help you in between, but forgive me if I had a slow response from here till mid-September where I'm taking my board exam. And then the second 2 groups that we're doing are really related to the mental well-being. One is DBT skills group. So the DBT is related to dialectical behavioral therapy. That's the acronym for it. That's the short abbreviation for it. One of my dear friends is an expert in the DBT, and we have this discussion about how valuable for residents and for physicians to have those skills of the DBT during their applications and actually during residency and after, how to solve interpersonal effectiveness situation, how to do a stress tolerance, and do when you are in an acute crisis, how do you bring yourself down into thinking dialectically about those problems. Those skills made a lot of difference in my life personally, and I think they helped a lot of other people, and they are also known as a treatment for a lot of many disorders. But what my point is that those skills are not just helpful for the psychiatric disorders, they're helpful for any person. And so if you have them, you will be more skilled as a person. My hypothesis is you will be more skillful as a doctor. The body mind skills group is more like related to meditation and self-care, and this does bring you into learning how to do meditation and mindfulness and engage that into your daily activities, how to use the breathing activities into your day. And my hypothesis with those groups is that if you start learning those skills before residency, it really gonna help you so much when you are a resident to do them, even when you're driving back home or even when you are just arrived home. You will find that routine into your day. So those are the upcoming groups. Look out for them on the Facebook group and on the Facebook page, and we also will send you emails if you signed up for this webinar with the details. This is one more webinar that we changed the date to add more people to it into September 8th. Cybersecurity skills for physicians. That's really important skill that now everything is done virtually, how to protect your own data and your information. Sign up for that so you can learn how kind of like before also you start residency. That's a skill that will help you so much moving forward, especially if you're using all of us are doing that online financial transactions, and all our informations are up there right now. This is our contact information, and please follow us on Twitter and like our page on LinkedIn and Facebook, and also email us with your feedback. I want to hear from you. What do you want to hear from us next? And was that experience helpful, not helpful? And what will really make sense for you in the future to help you during your journey to becoming a physician in the United States. I hope we were able to help you today and all the webinars that we have before. And I really have a big trust in you all. You are, as I watched one of the videos today, you're 11 out of 10, not just 10. If we are on a scale from 1 to 10 awesomeness, you are 11 out of 10 awesome. So just believe in yourself and consider that this journey is, even if it's tough, you will get there and you'll be a physician who will change a life of a lot of people. So I believe in you, and I want you to believe in yourself as well. With that being said, I want to ask Muhammad if he has any final words, and we'll leave it as that.
No, thank you so much, Ella, for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. I think it has been a really great experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you, Muhammad, as usual. Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.